Welcome in to another episode of Odd Man Rush. Hope you're having a great summer. Hope you had a great 4th of July and Canada Day wherever you may be listening to us. My name is Will Highland, joined by Kyle Diezel, recording on July 5th. We're 4 days past the beginning of free agency and roughly 9 days past the draft. And so, since Diesel and I last talked, there's been a litany of roster transactions throughout the league. So we're going to try our best to get to as many of them as we can today, at least the big ones. And Kyle, before we get to the biggest one, I think, and probably the oldest one since we last talked, I do need a weather report and a report on how great and free your 4th of July was.
Yeah, so the weather here has been pretty toasty. Today's the first day it's dropped down to probably the 80s again. It's been at least 90 and humid. Did some golf here on Friday, watched some fireworks, can't complain there. Played some yard games, card games, nothing too crazy. It could have gone down to the lake, could have gone to the beach. A lot of them have been contaminated with all the sewage being thrown in there. So unfortunately, we weren't going to risk it and get a bull eye or something like that. So we just kept it low key, a little cookout, things like that. How about yourself?
Um, I'm doing good, but hold on, we gotta rewind. What's going on with the sewage in the lakes?
Yeah, so some of the beaches, especially in parts of Vermont and parts of New England here, there was sewage that was let out because of one of the storms that recently came by, and there was backup of sewage leaked into the river. Now it's all over the place. Beaches and lakes are partially closed, depending on where you are. So we got to take care of our sewer system here. It seems like there's an issue in New England with
I've missed
being up to
that,
date.
but the only thing I did was I waded in the ocean yesterday,
Okay.
and then I went in a pool, so we're good. I went in a pool, so we're fine. Wow, okay. Yeah, so yeah, my 4th of July was good. I'm glad I didn't jump in a lake. Yeah, so it was hot, just like here, just like you in in Vermont. It was hot here in Maine. Really, since we last saw each other in person about 8 days ago, I feel like
Yeah.
it's just been one big humid fest in the Northeast. So I'm recovering. Um, but speaking of humidity, a subtropical climate in the United States is South Florida, and they have certainly, despite their weather and climate, fielded probably one of the best ice hockey regions that we've seen over the last, decade or so, with the Lightning and Panthers both becoming consistent contenders for the Stanley Cup. And the last time we did a pod, Kyle, we were talking about how Darren Rash um, had left Tampa and was going to Toronto. But then, like, roughly 36 hours after we stopped our recording last time, uh, Brady Tkachuk goes from Ottawa to the Florida Panthers. So, what do you make of the younger Tkachuk brother joining um, his older brother in Sunrise?
It's phenomenal. I mean, it's something I think everyone wanted to see is the Kachuk brothers together. I think this will also lead way to eventually the Hughes brothers playing together at some point, if this is the case. It's only a matter of time if it's going to be a trade or through free agency. But the Panthers are going all in. They are a team here, as they saw last year, they were decimated with injuries, as we saw. But they're loading up this year to run the East. Unfortunately, I don't think many teams in the East stand a chance against this team if they're healthy enough. Look at what they traded for. I mean, it's unbelievable talent from forwards, defensemen to goaltending. They trade for uh, Brady Tkachuk here, phenomenal player. They're going to be a huge enforcer team. I wouldn't be surprised if he's with playing on the same line of his brother. I'm not sure
Absolutely.
who the center will be. If it's going to be like a Ryan Harp, it's going to be a Sam Bennett. I'm not sure what that combo
Probably
is going to look like.
Barkov,
Or
maybe.
Barkov if he's ready to
Yeah.
roll at the beginning of the season because he missed all of last year. But don't forget they're bringing back their former, I think it's assistant or captain, Gudas. back coming back here with another trade to them, but also picking up two goaltenders in trade, picking up Markstrom from the Devils here, trading away a few players and build some cap space, and then also trading for Kier Smith. So this team is ready to lock and load. Do you see this team potentially will making a run back to the Stanley Cup Finals after what we just saw in this offseason?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think we still have to put some respect on the Carolina Hurricanes who just
Yep.
won and we saw them dominate the playoffs. But I think you and I have both pointed out that unlike previous years, they didn't have to go through the Florida team that had given them problems in the past. And I'm a fan of a team that has certainly had problems against Florida in the Stanley Cup playoffs, so I understand how much of a juggernaut they've been. You know, I do think they run the risk a little bit
Mhm.
of stretching the window. You know, in hockey, they talk all the time because it's a hard cap league with finite contracts about a team's window to win. And I do think they're stretching the window a little bit. If you think about they put, they signed Gudas to a 6-year deal. I mean, he's not going to see the end of that contract.
Nope.
Brad Marchand's not going to see the end of his contract. Um, but they've been smart about it so far. Like they dealt Evan Rodriguez to um, New Jersey, like he's a bottom six player that they felt was expendable. Anton Lundell, Eetu Luostarinen, Brad Marchand, those guys are going to still probably play on the third line. You're going to have Verhage, Reinhardt on the wing probably, and then probably Bennett on your second line, and then your first line is going to be Barkov and the Kachucks. I mean, that's as good of a top nine as I see in the Eastern Conference from a
Yep.
forward perspective. And then on defense, like Ekblad, again, these guys aren't getting any younger, but they're still enough in their prime where could this Florida team win 50 games? Yes. Yes. Yeah, they easily win 50 games and push 115 points. Like
Yep.
that's what I see. And I think last year was a little bit of an anomaly. Look, they played the whole year without Sasha Barkov, who's, in my opinion, the probably the best two-way player in the whole league. And especially since Patrice Bergeron retired and Jonathan Taves, got older and left the league and then came back. Like those two guys were the best two-way players in the league, but now it's easily Barkov. So and they played all of last year without him and most of last year without Matthew Tkachuk. So like adding Brady to the mix, I don't think Brady is the kind of guy who's gonna like have 75 points on a team like that, right? Like
No.
he doesn't need to either. Like I don't think Reinhardt's gonna score 60 goals again. Like I just think it's more likely that you're going to have a war of attrition when you play the Florida Panthers, and they're going to wear you down. I'm not enamored with Markstrom as a goalie, but if he can give you 30 quality starts, like to use a baseball expression, like I mean, I see them winning the Atlantic for sure. Like with this roster, because everyone is playing where they're supposed to be playing. Like
Yep.
there's not like they lost AJ Greer, but they got Garnet Hathaway, which in my opinion is like sort of a better AJ Greer, maybe not a younger AJ Greer, but certainly fills the role. So like they still have that fourth line presence that makes them so hard to play against. So to answer your question, yes, they could easily find their way back in the Stanley Cup final contention mix easily. Now, getting there is hard, but being a contender in February, March, and April, heading into the playoffs, absolutely. No, I think they're going to be in that conversation 8 months from now. I guess my question back to you would be like, if you're Ottawa and you've had a couple pushes, like they made the playoffs last season, they didn't this season, they fell apart at the end. Um, right? Yeah. No, they played in the first no, they barely got in. They
Yeah.
played Carolina and got destroyed. Sorry. I forgot. But they should have been probably the wild card one, right? But the Bruins were the wild card one. So I think that Ottawa. Ottawa has fallen a little bit. So like my question to you would be, we spent the last 3 to 4 years in the Atlantic Division talking about Ottawa, Montreal, Detroit,
Yeah.
Buffalo. Easily safe to say that Buffalo and Montreal have arrived. Do you think their arrival plus the trade of Kachuk to Florida has essentially, and the request of Larkin to leave Detroit, has sort of sunk the other two? Like, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, do you think like those two they had their chance and they've lost it? Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I mean I agree. I think Ottawa wasn't going to come to terms with Brady Kachuk, and they figured it was time to get rid of him. They've been trying for umpteen years with that team to get to be there. I mean, they had it in the early 2000s to make a push there, but they haven't done anything since. And I think it's a rebuild phase for both of them and Detroit. It's just a matter of how you go about it. I do think they made a smart trade here at the Sharks to get William Eklund, but also pick up a few more younger players who were about the age of 21. Brandon Savalba and then Karspier Hottens. Excuse me if I'm pronouncing their names wrong, but they're going to start
Hey,
rebuilding
you tried.
younger guys. And I think it's a smart decision. My question, which is fine by me, I think it's the perfect time to do it because you know you're not going to, unfortunately, have a chance if you're looking at the division they're in. If they're in the Metropolitan, I'd say it's a different story. You have a better shot. But they're not in the Metropolitan. So right now it's a great time for them and the Red Wings to tank. I'm not sure what the Red Wings are going to do with Dylan Larkin. Like it's going to have to be a pricey deal in return for them to get rid of their captain. So I wouldn't be surprised if they start their rebuild here soon. Once we see Dylan Larkin go, I would see DeMarco go as well for them. So it's just a matter of time of when they give up these guys.
Yeah, yeah. No, and it's too bad because they still, at least Ottawa made the playoffs those two times,
Correct.
and they did play well in. I want to say like right after the trade deadline, they got really hot.
Yeah.
But the thing about them is they even when they've made the playoffs the last couple of years, they've just been very streaky and and Detroit. I mean, if you want to talk about a team that actually collapsed, I mean Detroit collapsed. They were second or third in the division in
Mhm.
January, and they didn't miss the playoffs, and they fell off a cliff. And to your point about the rebuild, if you are a player like Dylan Larkin, we've talked about Larkin a couple times now, last few episodes. You know, you have a particular trade destinations in mind, whether that be Vegas, Carolina, Florida, uh, Minnesota. You know, I I think that makes a GM like Steve Yzerman have to. You're in a really tough spot because your captain wants to leave. Your team's going nowhere. It was a very similar situation with Kachuk in Ottawa. Team's going really nowhere. I mean, they have some guys there like Ottawa's got Tim Stutzel, and Detroit has, like you said, Raymond and DeBrincat to complement Larkin, but neither one of those teams really have the players to put behind their superstars, and the superstars know that. And so
Mhm.
they request these trades, and it really puts them in a tough spot. So as far as the rebuilding is concerned, it might just be something you have to do. And the reason why I think that even more, just to round out the whole division, we've talked about Florida. It goes without saying that Montreal and Buffalo are up and coming. Now we'll see if they can match the amount of success they had last year. It's very hard to repeat that kind of thing in the National Hockey League. But the rest of the division is still very good too. Tampa Bay is not going anywhere.
Nope.
They get John Carlson. You know what I'm saying? Like I
Yeah.
know he's not a spring chicken, but that guy is still a bona fide top four defenseman on any team, like any team he's on. One of the best offensive defensemen in the entire league at his prime, and he's a big leader. So
Yep.
that's they're not going anywhere. Not with that goaltender. Not with that decor. Not with that top line. And then the Bruins. Let's talk about my Bruins for a second. I think they got better. What do you think? Do you think addition JJ Paterka, Will Borgen, Connor Clifton is greater than Victor Arvidsson and Andrew Peeke? Because I mean that's pretty much what they did. They swapped out Paterka for Arvidsson,
Yep.
and then they brought in Clifton instead of Peak, and then they bring in Will Borgen instead of Andrew Peak or Jonathan Asbro or whoever else that's not going to make the team. I think on paper that's better. Now the big question for them is they're going to ride with Mike DiPietro probably as their backup goalie, who had a phenomenal year in the AHL last year. Um, best winning percentage in the AHL last year. Instead of Jonas Corposalo. So on paper, do you think the Bruins got better?
I think they got better defensively. I'm not going to say they got better offensively. I do think bringing up the young guy is going to be a huge benefit. It's just going to be his first year fully playing as a backup goaltender, so you have to see how that goes. Picking up Paterka, I think, is a huge win for them as well. They really gave up two first round picks for the future here, one of their own, and then a future one for Florida. So for them, I'd say that's a win. You get a young guy who's probably going to be on your first or second line there. And then remind me who they trade for the defenseman again. Is
So they
it?
traded for Will Borgen from
Yep.
the New York Rangers, and then they traded for, or they signed Connor Clifton, who used to be play for the Bruins, who's kind of like a bottom pair guy, but you know he plays minutes, and I think he's a more athletic Andrew Peak. I mean, at this point in their careers, so I like Andrew Peak, but
Yep.
that price tag was going to get crazy, and so they were able to get Connor Clifton, who I think is an upgrade personally, and it's Will Borgen is certainly an upgrade.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think on paper the Bruins got better. Like you said, we'll see what happens in goal. They're going to ride with Mike DiPietro, uh, and then as far as Paterka is concerned, I, I am I am always going to be the guy that says if you can get a younger player with term for draft picks, you do it.
Yep.
Because that's what he is. He's 24 years old. He has term. I can find out how many years left on his contract that they're going to have him for. But like anybody they drafted with the 25th overall pick, and I remember we said this when we were in the car actually together when it broke.
Yep.
Um, Anybody you draft at 25 overall this year isn't sniffing the NHL until at least like 2030 or 2029.
Correct.
Like you've got at least 3 to 4 years before that person is even close to being in the NHL. It's even if he was a top five pick, you would say he's probably 18 years old, so it would be a big ask for him to make the league. So and then the Florida pick for next year, there's no shot that that Florida pick is going to be anything, and it's top 10 protected anyway. I don't think it's going to be anywhere close to the top 15 because I think Florida's going to be in the playoffs and they might even win the whole damn thing. So like I'm totally okay with the Paterka trade. I think he needs to change his scenery. 7.7 million for a left winger who's 24 years old.
Mhm.
I mean that's really good money heading into the cap, and he's got 4 more years under his belt. And he doesn't have a no trade until the final year. So I'm really good with that deal. So bottom line, before we wrap up the Atlantic and the moves that happened in that division, I mean I think the division is pretty much Florida, Montreal, Buffalo, Tampa are going to be like duking
Yep.
it out probably for the top three spots. But then you're going to have Boston and dare I say the Maple Leafs pushing around for a wild card. I really do. And look, and that's assuming that Montreal and Buffalo are still going to be living up to the expectations that they set for themselves. So it's that. How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be the same setup. Buffalo is still young. Same with Montreal there, but they did give up. Both teams did give up key assets. As Alex Tuch, who got traded to Washington, and then Montreal got rid of what's their longtime player there,
Gallagher, Brendan
Gallagher,
Gallagher. Yeah.
to get money. So they opened up cap space there. So I think it's a win-win for both teams.
Yep.
However, I don't see Montreal. I don't see them getting better right now. Of having less than 20 shots on goal in the playoffs throughout multiple games is not going to win you series. And I don't think they picked up anyone currently that's going to help them on that end of scoring. Even though
No,
you have one of the.
they just
So I just don't think they
dealt with
got better. I don't think Buffalo got better either. in the offseason. I'm trying to think if there's any breaking news for them besides open up cap space. I don't
Well,
think they got,
they let Bo Byram walk.
you know,
That's something to think about. I mean, they and like for Montreal, they sort of kept
get
housekeeping in
them.
line. Like
Yeah,
they extended Demidov. They didn't go out and get anybody new. I think there were. I still think, and that this will lead us into the rest of the league, and some of the goalies that moved. I still think there's an outside chance that Buffalo trades for Connor Hellebuck.
okay, okay. I can see that based on what's
I,
currently happened. I
I
mean,
still I still think because we'll talk about the rest of the league now. We really dialed in on the Atlantic Division because I think that's where there's the most intrigue. Um, Bruins bias aside, but like you look at Buffalo and the fact, like to your point, they didn't do a whole lot. But then you look at Winnipeg, and Winnipeg goes and they sign Stu Skinner, and we're less than a year and change away from Stuart Skinner was starting Stanley Cup final games, and he was traded to Pittsburgh with the idea that Skinner would be a playoff goalie for them, and he was. So like somehow Winnipeg is. I don't think Stu Skinner goes to Winnipeg if he thinks he's not going to play a lot. You know what I mean? Like if he wanted to go somewhere that needed a goalie, there were plenty of teams that needed a goaltender. Like
correct.
his agent should have been on the phone with Florida. His agent should have been on the phone with possibly Columbus, or with really anybody in the Central Division. Honestly, outside of Winnipeg is in the market for a goalie, and they ended up being the ones that got him. So that's what's weird to me is that I think there's still an outside chance that Connor Hellebuck gets traded, and if so, I think it's going to be to Buffalo. And I was right about Brady leaving, so who
Mhm.
knows?
Yeah, I mean, they need a guy like that in Buffalo. They truly do. They have a lot of assets to give up and some cap space to pay him. Maybe the Jets can withhold and pay some of his salary, but I'm surprised that um, Carolina here hasn't tried to make a move yet. I'm surprised Vegas hasn't decided to pull the trigger to go get a goaltender because those are two teams we look at that need goaltenders. I mean, the Canes just let Anderson walk here. So I mean, you're going to bring Bussy in, who had played phenomenal in the playoffs here for the last few games. Doesn't mean that's going to lead and transition to this entire year. I guess you're going to ride it out to kind of see. And we've already talked about what's going on with Buffalo's goaltending. They truly need help there. Same with Vegas, need help there. They trade Smith away, so now they've got extra space there. The question is, I guess, is what do they get in return? What is the offer you put out there to get a guy like that who is aging?
That's a good question. I don't know because he's got like 5 or 6 years left at 8.5 million for. I just looked it up for Hellebuck. That's, I mean, that would be a big chunk of change for Buffalo to take on. But look, I just think it's a strange development because, excuse me, there's plenty of teams like you said that needed a goaltender. I didn't even mention Carolina as one of those teams that needs a goalie. And I thought I thought they would have made a move right now. I think they might be running it back, and I don't blame them. They had a phenomenal season. Um, but there's a lot. Although they could be a sneaky team that trades for Connor Hellebuck, I don't know. Um, so that's been something that's strange to me. But let's actually head further out west, Kyle, because I think a lot of the action happened on the coasts.
Yep.
It did. It happened in the Atlantic Division and the Pacific Division. The Metro had some moves. We'll talk about your Devils last, um, and I'll get your take. But like, if you look at the Pacific, dude, like the Kings were just spending money. The Kings were just throwing
Mhm.
checks around, and the Ducks were just trading people. And meanwhile, the Sharks were just eh, writing checks as well. So the whole state of California was in a feeding frenzy. So what do you think of those California teams and how they fared over the last 10 days or so? Because there was a ton of movement in and out of the Golden State or whatever they call it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the Kings, they're going to be fine. They're going to have they're going to be better than what they were last year. I mean, Panarin's going to have a second year there, for example. So I think this team is going to improve. I do think the concern here is what are the Ducks doing? They trade McTavish. Potentially, their captain could be going away with the offer sheet for the Flyers. Who lets their captain just walk away like that? And the Ducks have cap space. That's the thing. I don't know if they're not going to sign him back. Is this team trying to rebuild or are they trying to be competitive? Like I'm a little confused here on what they're trying to accomplish on their end. But the Sharks, I'm scared. I mean, like we talked about, the future is teal here. So the Sharks are a team I'm most concerned about potentially winning the division here for multiple years and probably the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I think the timeline might be a little aggressive on the 2 to 3 years because I still think that like Edmonton and Vegas and are going to be good.
Connor
Um,
McDavid's only got 2 years on his contract.
very
I said
true,
two or
very
three
true.
years.
Yeah, very true. Okay, well said. But like yeah, just on the San Jose front, they've got some dudes. Like they've got some dudes now, and they weren't afraid to spend money. Truba, Marchment, others come into that team. They were willing to do what it took to improve the squad with the idea that we're going to push for the playoffs this year. Um, and like there's some risk in that because they could be a little premature. I think, for instance, you guys kind of ran into that in New Jersey a few years ago. You made the playoffs, and then you've kind of squandered the last couple of years a little bit, but you got kind of trigger happy with that really good
Yep.
season, and so I do think you don't want to rush the rebuild because it's working out really
Correct.
well for San Jose right now. So like if they just don't do anything else, see how this season goes, don't trade any more big picks, and don't trade any more young players because not because you want to use those picks because I think they've used a ton of picks over the years, but more so because you'd want to deal those picks at a trade deadline if you were in the playoff mix.
Correct.
That would be the smarter way of going about it. And that's sort of what Anaheim did last year, and that helped them get into the playoffs. But to your point about the Ducks, what's weird is that, like, Leo Carlson, he got offer sheeted, as you pointed out, by Philadelphia at 18 mil, at a 21-year-old center who you picked second overall, I think, in a few years ago.
Yep.
Um, he is a stud. It's just like they traded McTavish because they didn't see him as being that guy, and they saw Leo Carlson as that guy. McTavish was supposed to be that guy, but he was really, and so was Zegras, right? But they ended up not being a part of the future there, and for that reason, they should have figured out the Carlson thing ahead of time. Because
Correct.
if you're going, it's sort of like when the Bruins traded Allmark before they had Swayman's contract inked. That was a bad idea. Because then Swayman had all the negotiating leverage. Right now, Leo Carlson's saying, "Look, I've got a bag on the table for Philadelphia. I know that you guys have to match it, and if you guys don't, you, they literally have all the leverage." And Philadelphia knew that when they offer sheeted him because they said, "Oh, you guys traded McTavish. You guys have all this money, so." There should be no reason for you guys not to match it, but we're going to give it to him anyway and call your bluff. And I do think Anaheim will do it, but $18 million is insane because that would make him the top paid player in the league. And
Correct.
I mean, he hasn't earned it,
No.
but in 5 years, if he's McDavid, then we'll all look back and say, or if he's Eichel, we'll all look back and say, yeah, that was a really good move by whomever, whether it's Philadelphia or Anaheim. Um, but I just find it bizarre that
Yeah.
that they traded Gudas, they let John Carlson go they traded his rights to Carolina, and then Carolina didn't even use him. And then also like they trade McTavish, and now they're letting Leo Carlson's future hang in the balance. It's very weird offseason for the Anaheim Ducks.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I said, no idea what they're going to be doing here. I mean, I feel like he is going to be a flyer here looking at it. I think, like you just mentioned, them paying for him. I don't think the Ducks are willing to pay for a guy who hasn't produced yet too much, at least as they think. So I think he will be a flyer here by the end of the week. But I'm not sure what the Ducks are really thinking. They're like getting one. Like I said, in return, they're looking at future. Got 2 first-round picks here for Matavis from the Blues, trading John Carlson for Kyle Masters, and then getting A.G. Greer. That's really it. Like
Yeah, like I think
this isn't better.
they've got their goalie. I'm looking at the roster now. I agree
Yeah.
with you. They've got their goalie. Dustall's good, and he's at good money. I mean, that's pretty good money for how good he's going to be in his age. Then, so he's making 6.5. That's fine. They've got their number one D, who's Jackson Lacombe. Great. Um, they've got their young D, Pavel Mintyukov.
Yep.
Very good player. So they've got those two guys making big money, and then they've got their top two D. They've got their top goalie. That's fine, but their forwards, I'll disagree with you. I think they will pay up for Leo Carlson, and the reason why is they've got Chris Kreider and Alex Killorn coming off the books this year,
Yep.
and so they'll be able to pay Carlson, and they'll be able to pay Cutter Gauthier because I think, and Bennett Seneke. I think they'll be able to pay all three of those guys. Um, I think Bennett Seneke is probably in the market to make about 7 million, and I think Cutter Gauthier is probably in the market to make about 8 or 9. Right now they have about 9 million in cap space, but they don't have to pay those two young guys I just brought up immediately because then you'll have Kreider and Killorn come off the books, and you'll also have a couple other your defensemen come off the books in the next couple of years on your bottom pairing. So like they're going to have enough money. Plus the cap's going to go up to 113 after next year. So I think they'll be able to do it. I just don't like them playing with matches, right? They're kids playing
Yep.
with matches. I don't think it's a smart move. You had everything going for you. And I wouldn't have risked it because now, I mean, I I would I would be very careful if I was any team with a young stud who was an RFA because once Philadelphia puts an offer sheet out, now it's kind of like open season on anyone's RFAs who aren't signed, and that's a scary place to be. All right, I forget what you said about the Kings, because we talked about the Sharks and Ducks so much in the last few minutes, but um, yeah, I mean, I think the Kings were just a little bit big on the pocketbook, and I think they're not going to pay Anze Kopitar anymore. He's
Nope.
retired. They've got Kempe and Panarin at the top of their pay sheet. Kevin Fiala, who was hurt last year. Quentin Byfield, who's still very good. So their forwards look fine. Drew Doughty's only making 11 million for one more year.
Yep.
Then he's probably off the books. Um, Darcy Kemper making 5.25 for one more year. Anton Forsberg, another goalie making 2.25. So they've got a lot of big contracts on this team, but they're not going to stick around forever. So I think they have a lot of flexibility, but they did go out and they paid Eric Holla and they paid for
Yep.
Scott Lofton and they paid for Corey Perry and Matt Zuccarello and Jared Wright, and they were just literally handing out contracts all over the place. I think they're kind of doing what the Bruins did last year, which is, hey, we know we're paying the top of our roster a lot of money, but we're gonna try and fill in the bottom of the roster with a lot of veterans and hope that we can make the playoffs. It worked for the Bruins last year. They didn't get beyond the first round. But I think that's sort of the strategy for the Kings is they're going to try and do that, and then hopefully spend again in free agency because they're always going to be a destination LA. People are always going to contemplate going there. And look, you brought up McDavid. He could follow in Wayne's footsteps.
You could.
He could go to LA. Anyway, so who haven't we talked about that made big moves? We texted ahead of time. Did we miss anybody? I'm looking. We talked
Let's
about
see here.
we talked about the four that. Oh, we haven't talked about Jason Robertson yet. Um, talk about another guy who's an RFA who could get offer sheeted at any moment. Um,
I think it's as of today, it can be offer sheeted at the end of the day.
okay. So Exactly. At any moment. It's talking, I would not put it past somebody to come in at the 11th hour and offer sheet Jason Robertson. And it's going to be a team with a lot of cap space. Could it be the Hurricanes? Could it be a team like Anaheim who just lets Carlson go to? I don't think that would be smart, but they could let Carlson go to Philadelphia and then go for Robertson. I don't know what they're going to do. Um, but do you think he's traded before the season starts, or do you think he signs like a prove it deal or something? Not that he has to prove it, he's a top 30 player in the league, but like, do you think that Robertson is a star a year from now, or is he having his days limited in Dallas?
Things have been going on this long. I think days are kind of numbered for him. Doesn't mean they're not going to sign him to a short year deal, or they sign him to a long year deal and they trade him away. Just no one's going to want that contract afterward is the issue for him. He's a guy you have to pay. I mean, it's a player we talked about who should have made Team USA. Could debate he still should have been on that Team USA team. Um, but I don't see him being a star. If this is what it is, and he's like, hey, you guys aren't willing to pay me, and I'm averaging, 80 points a year, one of the best American young players we have right now, I think it's time for them to pay the guy. Like, something's got to happen here. I mean, you paid your goaltender, you paid your captain to return. So I think it's
Yeah.
time for them to put the money where their mouth is.
They got they got 9 million in cap space. I agree with you. They got 9 million in cap space right now. Sagan's going to come off the books next year. At age 35, they're probably not going to bring him back. He's been hurt a lot recently. He'll end up probably going somewhere on a short-term deal to close his career, kind of like Patrick Kane did. Um, Heinz, Johnson, Duchesne, all making decent money on their forward group. Jamie Benn coming back, for the league minimum this year. Uh, but they don't have a lot of guys they need to pay, is my point. Like, it's not like they have these young prospects like the Ducks do, right? With Seneke and Gauthier. Like, the the Stars don't really have like young guys who aren't paid. Like you said, they paid Andra already. They paid Harley already. They paid Mikko Rantanen already. They paid Miro Heiskanen already. Like, they have all of their top talent under contract. They paid Heinz already and Wyatt Johnston. Like, there's nobody left that they need to pay other than Robertson. And they have the money to do it right now. And they could trade. They could trade a Tyler Sagan or a another tradable contract on this roster I'm looking at. Like, they could trade one of these guys. I mean, they could trade Radek Faksa, for instance. Like, he's only making $2 million. He's like a third line center. Like, they could move a little bit of money if they had to. Like, maybe they'd retain money on Sagan. Like, if they wanted to move him, he's only 34.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they could do that. But even so, they don't have to. Like, they could pay Robertson, um, to a short-term deal and then sign him to a long-term deal once they clear Sagan's money, for instance. Like, and the cap goes up. I don't really know what they're doing. They could send him out for a bag. Wasn't there a rumor that he of a trade destination that he didn't
It was with Seattle, but there is
that's
breaking
what it
news.
was.
But there is breaking news here, probably from ESPN here, like literally 10, 12 minutes ago,
What?
that Jason Robinson has filed for salary arbitration. Him and 15 other players here are going to be going to a hearing on July 20th through August 1st here for it. So salary arbitration here. There's 15 players. He's not the only superstar there. There's Trevor Zargis as well is on there. A couple other names. Kier Schmid, Nick Robinson. There's Kirby Deitch from Montreal. Like, there's a couple superstars on there that are going to the salary arbitration. So I'm interested to see how this turns out. It could turn into a 1 to 2 year contract. And if that's the case, I feel like this is something that's not long term with a team. If this is the case they're going. Um,
It
So
really
I just
sours your relationship with your team
sours
really
the
quickly.
taste. So
Yeah.
potentially, like I said, Trevor Tavares is going to be leaving soon, potentially from the Flyers. He's probably not going to stay, especially if they get Leo Carson. There's no need to keep him. And then Jason Robinson, if he's going right to this, he just filed for it. He's not coming back to be a star after if he's getting a 1 or 2 year contract with them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if they settle it in arbitration court, whether it's Zegras or Robertson, I don't see those being long-term things. They usually aren't.
No.
They usually aren't long-term things. Um, wow. Okay. Well, that's some breaking news. We usually don't have that on the program. Yeah. So not great. Not great news for those fan bases if your guys weren't able to get it done. Um, So we'll have to see how it progresses next year, as we head toward next year's trade deadline with some of these guys. Now before we close out the pod, I promised we'd close by talking about the Devils. So the Devils not only, they took care of some internal business, much like Montreal did. They re-signed Nico
Yep.
Hischier, um, and they bring in actually Evan Rodriguez, who I like as a third line player.
Yep.
They let Markstrom go as part of that same trade. Um, what do you think about? Oh, and they signed Nico Dawes to an extension. What do you think about the Devils, how they looked, and how next year looks for New Jersey now that some of the offseason has unfolded?
Yeah, I mean, for the Devils, I think it's a huge win for them. Being able to get rid of that ugly contract from Markstrom is what's been killing them. Now they just got to figure out what to do with Dougie Hamilton. I hope they trade him away, but that's just my personal opinion. But I think it's time for him to go. They need to keep opening up space for this team. They filled out their lower six. I think they're going to be fine with that. As you mentioned before, they're bringing back the former player Jesper Boquist, someone they drafted years ago. Evan Rodriguez and Ben Seaves, that's already a line right there. So they're set filling out their bottom six. Still need a top six winger or center. So I think for them, they got to go out and get a guy. Yes, they did sign Nico Hischier back to a 5 year extension, which is phenomenal. Captain's coming back. So I'm hoping they go out there. Like I've said, I hope maybe they go for Alex DeBrincat here, bring him over, maybe get a double deal with Dylan Larkin, give up some future young talents.
I'm not sure you have the cap space for that,
Well, at
but
least bring in one of them to come in. I think
yeah,
it most
okay.
likely be DeBrincat because he's a winger, somebody we need to put out there. But I think it's a good reset, and they did put an offer sheet out for one of the Utah players. Barrett Hayton. Devils had a trade lined up with Utah and during the draft, and Utah decided to back out last minute. So to go back at them, they decided to do an offer sheet here. And I believe by the end of the week, if Utah doesn't offer up a trade or anything, I forget which round pick it would be, the Devils would get him in return. So we'll see what happens there. I don't think this team's going to be making the playoffs, but also the Metropolitan's pretty wide open, so they could make the playoffs for all I know.
Yeah, I
But
mean, outside Carolina and like I think Washington, we didn't talk about them. They made a lot of moves. They bring back Ovechkin on a short-term,
yeah,
short money deal. They get Tak, who you mentioned briefly. They bring in uh oh gosh, that center. I forgot his name. Anyway, I think Washington and Carolina, I think are definitely contenders. Um, I think the Islanders are going to be interesting to see how bad things get there. Didn't end great last year. I think New Jersey's going to be in the mix. The Rangers, I think, are not going to be there.
I think they're in a rebuild phase if
They're in a
they've got rid
rebuild
of.
phase. They had their chance a couple years ago and missed it,
I
which is
think,
too bad for that team.
did the Islanders even make a trade this year or anything? I don't think they're the only team right now in the Metropolitan who hasn't
I can't,
made a move.
nothing of like major. I'll look at their roster real quick. Did,
Looking at like recent trades over the last 2 weeks here, I have
yeah,
nothing.
they don't have a lot going for them right now. Um, so yeah, I don't think so. Am I missing anybody? Oh, Pittsburgh. Yeah, I mean Pittsburgh
Columbus.
and Philadelphia and Columbus. So those are kind of the wild cards, pun intended, in that division. It's like, Pittsburgh, they hung around last year and they're not getting any younger, but
Nope.
they're kind
Windows
of hard
closing.
kind of hard to count them out with the way they played last year when nobody thought they were going to be very good. Um, Now they weren't very good in the playoffs. Philadelphia, I think, caught lightning in a bottle a little bit. Um, we'll see what happens with Carlson, who we talked about already, Leo Carlson, that is.
Yep.
Um, and then I didn't mention we haven't talked about Columbus. The other drama going on in the league was is Zach Werenski going to leave Columbus? Sounds like he's not going to. Sounds like that was a little bit of a cold feet at the altar um, for Zach Werenski. So yeah, we'll see. I think I do think that I ended the pod last time saying this, so I'm going to say this again. I still think there's a move we're not seeing. At the end of last pod, like I did mention Brady Kachuk, I floated it. I was half kidding, but like I don't think a lot of people around the league saw him getting traded this offseason.
No.
I think people thought maybe in the future he'd team up with Matthew, but I didn't think people anticipated, I certainly didn't, that it was going to happen that quickly. So I floated Brady last time. I mean, I by the time we talk again, I mean,
Who knows what can happen?
who knows what could happen? I do think there's a move that we haven't seen coming in. I'll just call my shot and say that it's Hellebuck going to the Sabres. Do you have a hot take? Because we might not do another pod until August.
Oh gosh. I think, like I said, I'm gonna stick with it. I think the Brinket's gonna be out going somewhere. I think he will go to the Devils. And I think Dylan Larkin is gonna go out to probably the Sharks or Anaheim. That's how I see it. I see
Wow.
him going out there. If Leo Carson goes to the Flyers, go trade for another captain.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I do think there's going to be a gold rush to California. Um, see what I did there? Gold medalist rushing to California. This is
Well,
what that's what.
think about the hub of all the entertainment of sports right now. You've got the hot Los Angeles Lambs. You've got the Dodgers. Who doesn't want to go out to Cali right now?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's something to be said for that. In sports, I think there's kind of always been a draw to California for athletes. Um, and so like I think there might be a little bit of a push. I think in a few years you're going to be talking about those California teams the same way they were talked about 10 or 15 years ago when they were all good at the same time. I do think they're all emerging. I think maybe the Kings have more work to be done than the others, than the other two. But right now, in terms of the future, but there's always going to be an appetite for players to head out that way. So we'll just have to wait and see. All right, Kyle. Any other things to wrap up the show before we sign off?
No. Besides your Flames here making a lot of trade for younger talent and picks, I think they're on the uprise, and I think Vancouver right now is the team that's on the downfall as a team that needs to get their shit figured out.
Yeah, they've been a train wreck for a few years now. Yeah, just on the Calgary front, quickly, like I really enjoyed listening to some of the analysts talk about what they're building there. Now they need a lot. They need a lot to go their way, right? Like they
Correct.
they they've shown that out there that they can build a core, right? They had a core. Gaudreau, Kachuk, Monahan, all those guys, very and Hannafin,
Yeah.
very successful for a few years in terms of regular season wins. They just couldn't get it done in the playoffs. Mark Giordano was there and was their captain as well. So I think they could be building something similar to that. Now, the kid they drafted six overall looks like he was cast on, season 8 of Yellowstone or something. Like it was wild. So he'll fit in fine out there. But yeah, so they traded Blake Coleman and they traded for Simone Nemec and so like I think they have some new
Yeah.
blood coming in. They bring in Jacob Milton, who I like. So yeah, we'll see what the Calgary Flames do. I think it's better for the league when the Canada teams are at least half of them are good. Right now, I think Toronto is heading in the right direction. Sadly, Montreal's certainly heading in the right direction. Sadly, as a Bruins fan, they both are. Um, and we'll see. Edmonton is kind of teetering in the next few years.
Yep.
Calgary, Vancouver, not very good right now. Winnipeg, kind of in limbo. But I think it's good for the league when those teams are competitive. I hope it stays that way. And Odd Man Rush jersey looks pretty sharp. The Utah colors, if you're
Mhm.
watching on YouTube, just wanted to brag about that. Um, Not available for sale yet. I wanted to wait till I got the sample in, but the sample feels nice and fresh. So we will be sure to let everybody know when they're available for sale. We'll have one modeled after UMaine colors or Utah Mammoth colors, depending on how you look at it. And then we're gonna have a red and black one for Diesel's New Jersey slash Rutgers connection slash St. Lawrence U connection. Um, but that's gonna do it, Kyle. I think for this episode. Sorry, I had an itch there. Good thing I didn't disappear this episode. I don't think I didn't pull an Austin.
No.
That's good news. We'll be back in August, everybody. We'll talk about what's ever happened between now and then. Maybe we'll do some early previews. Maybe we'll do some fun stuff. I don't know. We'll figure it out when we get there. Kyle, thanks for jumping on. Everybody stay cool and have a great
Yes.
rest of your week. Kyle, thanks for jumping on.